In a presentation to the President, National Treasury is apparently proposing cuts to national budgets. This is to salvage the country's economic position, and new guidelines are expected to reflect the priorities of Cabinet for its social spending. Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, has however assured the public during a media briefing that the President will be meeting ministers to address just issues around priorities, around a whole range of other discussions as well. The Finance Minister is expected to outline guidelines to departments ahead of his medium-term budget, which is taking place in November. Now, let's unpack the story for you. Author and political analyst Dr Ebrahim Harvey joins us this morning. Dr. Harvey, it's great to talk to you, especially given that you've written quite an interesting opinion piece on this very issue. And you seem to suggest that this is going to spell disaster for us if indeed these budget cuts do go ahead.
Yes, Michelle, thanks for having me, and good morning to your viewers. No, without any shadow of doubt, it looks extremely gloomy, what's the impact going to be. It's very serious. They even had the governor of the Reserve Bank present at that meeting. And you have to remember that this contemplated and quite severe, drastic budget cuts is going to primarily affect the public sector that is already reeling from the effects of austerity budgets and cutbacks over the past few years. Even the ANC's own COSATU ally, Labour ally, has been complaining. We have to see whether they're going to proceed, because COSATU and all the trade union federations immediately reacted and hit out at these contemplated budget cuts. But bear in mind also there's some more serious stuff. This social grant of 350, it's minuscule, it's a pittance when you look at the soaring cost of living. That is going to now be dependent, if it continues beyond March 2024, on they proposing, can you believe that, a 2% increase in VAT in order to fund a continuation of that minuscule amount of 350 beyond March 2024. So all in all, and you can see already what is happening to the public sector. The public sector, look no further than the public hospitals. It's in a total unmitigated mess. I mean, patients not even having food, medicines. It's the worst time on the whole for the government to have now contemplate and threaten, these cuts. You have to see whether they're going to proceed with it in the light of civil society's response, and particularly the trade unions,
Yeah.
And really, I have been one to say that I think the ANC is going to lose 2024 now. They've dug themselves into a bigger and deeper hole now with this, and it seems they're quite determined to proceed. Whether they're going to do it, we have to see.
Dr. Harvey,
but it's really a bad time, and I mean, just 9-10 months before the 2024 elections, it's very worrying.
Dr. Harvey, what about ballooning government expenditure, though? I mean, our tax revenue is falling. We're under incredible pressure, exacerbated by load shedding, by logistics and the issues at Transnet as well. Our borrowing costs are much, much higher as well. How does that come into the play? Because surely we need to do something, right, to rein it in.
No, there's no doubt. Although COSATU and the other unions are going to hit out at you, they're going to answer that with the fact, you mustn't forget that an estimated 2 to 3 trillion rand has been stolen, pillaged from the public sector and the state sector. Just bear that in mind. And, whenever you have austerity budget cuts, you don't see ministers and the president being affected. Their salaries, which are massive and enormous, continues with their perks. I mean, and even you see what happened this year. We discovered that they don't even pay for basic services. So that is the response of organized labor. If you raise that, and there are legitimate concerns, there's a global crisis, not just in South Africa, a global economic crisis, which is impacting on South Africa. But, the ANC has to realize we're sitting with 9-10 months before the next election. And I can tell you, if they proceed with this, these severe cutbacks, I am more certain that they're bound to lose the 2024 elections. And the other opposing parties, particularly the DA, is watching the space very closely. I have no doubt that you're raising important questions, but it's a question of perspective, how you look at this in the context I've just sketched now. They never suffer budget cuts, the ministers and the senior politicians of the ruling party. I mean, you have to take that into account. In other words, the disadvantages which the crisis breeds is not being equally shared by all parties. Yeah. It is disproportionately always falling on the shoulders of the black working class majority. And it's they, even the organized workers, who is going to suffer if these cutbacks. Well, at least the public sector wage agreement of March, April this year will save them, because it's a 2-year wage agreement. It's for this year and for 2024 into 25. So at least that is safe. But you've got to understand, we're sitting with the biggest cost of living crisis in the entire history of South Africa, not only post-apartheid South Africa. So it's the worst time for these contemplated. I hope the ANC reconsiders it really, because if they do, I have no doubt more so now that they're going to lose 2024.
I suppose the other thing that makes the situation even more difficult is that these calls for fiscal reform are not new by any means. These calls for essentially paring down insofar our spending is concerned, not new, Dr. Harvey. Some would say as far back as 2013, right? For 10 years now, we've been saying we need to cut down on our government budgets. Treasury started urging caution on spending as far back as 2013. And then, of course, in the past 6 months, due to particular issues around the world, but also here at home, that pressure has increased. In the midst of this, though, the ANC continues to announce new programs of action that's going to need even more money. And NHI comes to mind.
Well, in fact, this is if you heard what the Minister of Finance, he's realizing the massive implications of these budget cuts. So you know what he has said concerning which, in fact, I believe the NHI properly implemented, should have been introduced some years back already. The Minister of Finance is now saying whether, in fact, the state is going to be able to implement the NHI. This is the impact of the budget cuts that they're talking about. And that is going to it's going to throw the reason why the state is now moving towards the NHI is because they thought it will arrest the worst crisis in the public sector, hospitals in particular. And now you can see, because of the implications of these budget cuts, the Minister of Finance is now doubting that the state is going to be able to resource and implement the NHI. But you're right. It's for a decade. And in fact, go and look at COSATU, who is the ally of the ANC. They've been complaining of austerity budget cuts for as long, about 10 years. And now it's going to probably get worse if they do proceed. And then there are legitimate questions you've raised. But this is where we are at this moment. It's a deep, very deep systemic crisis. And there's no easy answers. But I can tell you, if they proceed, despite the huge protestations from civil society and the unions in particular, to these contemplated budget cuts, I mean, I have little doubt, and even more so than before, that 2024, the ANC is going to lose that election.
Let's not forget the state capture years as well, right, when we try to think about and understand the position that we're in financially now. If we talk about cuts, Dr. Harvey, one automatic thing that comes to mind is our expenditure on ministers, right, on cabinet. Is it not about time that we cut down from 30 to 10, as has been the recommendation from financial analysts for a very long time?
Yes, you know what? Ramaphosa, honestly, he's a big mouth, let me tell you. He said when he took office in 2018, he committed himself to reducing the size of this bloated cabinet. You're right. And what has happened? What has happened? It has not happened, but many other things that he has spoke about in his New Dawn speech has not materialized. But you mustn't also forget the ANC Youth League at their 79th centenary celebrations just last week, because they're feeling the impact themselves and their parents, everything else, of this worst cost of living crisis, they're now proposing quite strongly, and the ANC needs to take note of that, a 1,500 Rand basic income grant. Now, can you see how the pressures are mounting, and that from the ANC Youth League, no doubt resonates with the impact, devastating as it has been, of this load shedding crisis and the cost of all these crises are simultaneously converging at this particular combustible conjuncture. And, it's going to get worse, I think. And this is my fear, if they proceed to implement those budget cuts for the public sector.
The basic income grant is, of course, an incredibly important point, and civil society has fought for many, many years for us to start implementing that, right? But again, it's about balancing our fiscal policy framework versus what we actually have available. All of these issues, and you've mentioned this already, will no doubt feed into the elections next year. It's being described as important as the 1994 elections in terms of the change that is possible at the polls. How do you reckon the ANC can perhaps turn the situation around, and how other parties, the opposition, can also come to the party?
No, I think it's going to be extremely difficult for the ANC to turn things around. When you talk of voting, I mean, you're talking 8-9 months. What the ANC is not going to be. What they can do is to arrest this contemplation and seize it and not implement it. Because I can tell you what it's going to do, which is, if you read my column, it's going to, without any shred of doubt, and you can go and talk to political economists, it's going to worsen the crisis that we are experiencing at this moment. And this is the problem. This is the problem, and you have to ask yourself, what has happened since GAIR was implemented? We've had a neoliberal macroeconomic fiscal framework from 1996 until Asgisa. All these different versions were essentially, you see, the political economists, this guy Duma, I can't recall now the surname, uses his business day article to continuously hammer the ANC on this neoliberal framework. And the hallmark of it is, you can see what's happening with the 350. Minimalism is the hallmark of neoliberal macroeconomic frameworks. When welfare payments do take place in a crisis, it's always at the lowest level. I mean, what do you do with 350 rand? Those people are going to be much worse off. And look, where's that grant? Right now across the country, people are struggling. People have been collapsing, waiting in queues. The worst crisis in the implementation of these grants is happening right now. People have not been paid. 2 weeks after they were supposed to have been paid for September. It's been going on for the whole year and began even mid last year. So on the whole, really, it's very, very dire times, and I hope the ANC doesn't proceed with these cutbacks because affecting the public sector, because we're going to be much worse off, I can tell you, and particularly the public hospitals, if they do proceed.
Dr. Ebrahim Harvey, let me thank you for your time this Sunday morning. Indeed, incredibly important story as we look at budget cuts by National Treasury.